Yeah, so Oklahoma City, the Thunder have a San Antonio problem. I mean, here's a crazy stat. Three losses to the same team in like less than 2 weeks. I think it's 11 days. This is a matchup with the Spurs that's going to demand more from this Thunder squad, which is a very good squad, I might add. But Christmas Day games, they're supposed to be statements. They're supposed to tell the league you're not, who you are, not necessarily with bravado, but with authority. And for the Thunder, Wednesday afternoon at the Paycom Center, it was supposed to reinforce a story that they've been writing for 2 months: dominance, depth, discipline. I mean, that assurance that they are the top team in the West. But instead, what that game delivered was something far more uncomfortable. But maybe at the same time, something that's far more useful. Oklahoma City's 117 and 102 loss to the Spurs, it wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it wasn't super embarrassing. It was controlled, just not by the Thunder. And I think that's the part that lingers here, because this game, again, didn't expose an effort issue for Oklahoma City. It didn't expose talent gaps. It exposed something much more subtle and much more important. Who dictated the terms of the game? And again, it wasn't Oklahoma City. And, you look at one loss, yeah, you dismiss that. That is the NBA Cup. You look at two losses, well, you can rationalize that. It is second night of a back-to-back. But then you got three losses in a short span. That's a pattern. Now you've got a pattern. And San Antonio has now beaten Oklahoma City multiple times using the exact same blueprint: patience, spacing, size, and an absolute refusal to be sped up. The Spurs don't fear Oklahoma City's pressure. They don't panic against the ball pressure, the traps, the passing lane gambling. They actually welcome it. They absorb it, and then they bend the game back into a shape that they prefer. We've seen it 3 times. It's not luck. You can't say it's luck. You have to say, at this point, that's their identity. And on Christmas Day, the Thunder actually started well. They were sharp early. They were active defensively. They were aggressive in transition. But as the game settled, so did San Antonio. And by halftime, the Spurs had seized control, not with runs, but with repetition. Possession by possession, read by read, cut by cut. That's veteran basketball, regardless of age. And when the game slows, the answers matter. The most revealing stretches of this game, they didn't come during the Spurs' scoring burst. They came during the Thunder's stagnant moments. When Oklahoma City needed answers, when shots stopped falling, when driving lanes closed, when the margin hovered close enough to inspire belief, the Thunder didn't panic, but they didn't adapt quickly enough either. The ball just stuck. Spacing tightened, decisions slowed by half a beat. SGA, he still got his points because that's what elite players do. But this wasn't a game about his brilliance. It was about how comfortable San Antonio was living within SGA's brilliance. Right? So the Spurs didn't send chaos at Shea. They didn't overcommit. They trusted their structure and dared Oklahoma City's secondary options to tilt the game. And they didn't do that. They couldn't do that. There was no answer there. And that's the lesson. We talked about Oklahoma, the Sooners in the college football playoff, not having a talent problem. Guess what? The Thunder don't have a talent problem either. I mean, just be clear about this. The Thunder are not suddenly a flawed team. They're not overrated. They're not, quote, figuring it out. They're not regressing. What they're doing is they're entering phase 2 of contention. Phase 1 is surprise. Phase 2 is adjustment. Phase 3 is response. And Oklahoma City is firmly in phase 2. The Spurs didn't beat the Thunder because Oklahoma City lacked shooting, because the Thunder lacked toughness or depth. The Spurs beat the Thunder because they forced them into half-court precision battles, and then the Spurs won those battles. They executed cleaner. They maintained spacing under pressure. They punished small mistakes without forcing big risk. And that's how playoff series are going to be won. And until Oklahoma City consistently proves that it can dictate those moments, teams like San Antonio are going to remain dangerous. Not because they're better, but because they're comfortable in that environment. And don't get me wrong. I mean, again, as brilliant as they are offensively, the Thunder are still that brilliant defensively. But they've got to finish. This is an elite team with elite defense. None of that has changed by these 3 losses. But what has changed is the caliber of patience that they're facing. So San Antonio didn't dribble into traps. The Spurs didn't force passes. They waited for second and third actions, knowing that Oklahoma City thrives on disruption. And this game highlighted the next defensive evolution that I think the Thunder are going to have to make: possession completion. What that means is this: they got to finish rebounds. You got to communicate after the first breakdown. You got to stay disciplined when the initial advantage disappears. And the good news is those are not dramatic fixes, but thin margins decide championships. So let's talk about why this loss is actually valuable. It's an uncomfortable truth for Thunder fans. They may not want to hear this. They definitely didn't want to hear it on Christmas night. But this loss actually may matter more than some of the early season wins. Let me tell you why. Because it reveals exactly what kind of team Oklahoma City still needs to become. So San Antonio didn't surprise the Thunder. They challenged them structurally. They didn't expose some sort of fatal flaw that Oklahoma City may have had, but what they did is they illuminated the gap between being excellent and being unstoppable. And that gap is where championships live. Now the Thunder have film that matters. They have possessions that matter. They have questions about themselves that matter. How do they generate offense late against size? Who becomes the secondary aggressor when SGA is contained? Which lineups maintain spacing under playoff pressure? How do they counter teams that refuse to speed up? Those aren't problems. Actually, what they are is they're prompts. And perspective is the separator here. It's still December. Oklahoma City remains among the most elite teams in the West. They still defend at a championship level. They still have the league's most reliable roster and closer, I might add. They still have real, tangible internal growth coming. So what's happening now, it's not slippage, it's calibration. Every contender goes through this stage. The great ones, they don't even avoid it, they absorb it. And San Antonio, intentionally or not, they've become Oklahoma City's sharpest teacher. Not because the Spurs are unbeatable, but because they play a style that forces clarity. And clarity, even when it costs you a Christmas Day win, it's a gift that contenders can't afford to ignore. Ignore? I don't know. Maybe I just had a stroke. The response is going to define. Moving forward, that's what's going to define what this Christmas Day loss was about. The other 2 losses as well. Because the most important thing about this loss, it's not the score, it's the response. Do the Thunder refine their late game counters? Again, do they empower secondary creators earlier in the shot clock? Do they adjust defensive coverage to finish possessions? Do they embrace the discomfort of being hunted instead of, celebrated? If they do, then this loss becomes part of the foundation. If they don't, it becomes a big warning. But history and this team's DNA all suggest Oklahoma City will close growth over denial. And when April arrives, the lessons learned on Christmas Day, they may matter far more than what a final score, a final frustration, a Grinch stole Christmas type attitude ever did.